Good morning, Easter Camp! How are we feeling? Monday morning. Congratulations, guys. We've made it. I'm seeing some really tired faces out in the crowd right now. Who here reckons that camp needs to go on for another 5 days? Come on, give it up, give it up. Now, who here is ready for their bed, their Wi-Fi, and their own toilet? Yeah, there's a few more of those guys, eh? Well, I am one of the first ones. I am so gutted that we have made it here today, that we've made it to Monday morning, because that means it's time to go home. And I wish that there was longer for us to be here together at Easter Camp. Kia ora team, my name is Torin, as Stephen just shared. I'm the youth pastor at Royal Oak Baptist Church. Shout out Roundabout Youth in the corner. Shot team. And as sad as I am that camp is ending for this year, it is my absolute privilege to join you here and to send you all home. What a week. It's been fun, right? Who here has had an awesome time this weekend? Come on, people. How cool has it been to gather together over the last 4 days and spend our time talking about Jesus? We've got to spend lots of time with our friends and our leaders and our youth communities, people who care about us. We've listened to some wonderful people over the weekend share about what it means and their perspective on what it means to be called by Jesus. And maybe even this weekend we've encountered or experienced or met Jesus for the first time or in a different way than we have before. And I think that is something that needs to be celebrated. That's super exciting. Because I remember what it was like to be in those seats. I'm not that old. It wasn't that long ago. I remember how special times like Easter Camp is. I've been to Easter Camp my entire life. But, when I was a teenager, I remember hearing Jesus, people talking about Jesus and Jesus working in and around my friends' lives. And I remember being unsure of what was going on. I spent all of my time in high school struggling to understand just what it was that God was calling me to. And I wrestled with the thought, why can't I hear God the way that my friends do? Why don't I know what it is that He is calling me into? And so now as I share that, I just want to, let you know that there will be people in the seats around you who feel that way. There will be people who know and have had that exact experience at camp. Maybe you've come here and you've had a wonderful time experiencing God and all God's goodness, and that is awesome, and we're pumped for you. Maybe you've been feeling distant from God and you came to camp to draw a little bit nearer. Maybe you were dragged here by a mate and you still don't know why you've come here this weekend, and everywhere in between. Maybe you didn't hear the calling of God over your life as clearly as you'd hoped. And I just want to say you are not alone in that, and you should feel no shame. Don't compare yourself to those around you. Feel no shame. I know how that feels. I understand exactly what that's like. And so if that's you right now, I just want to let you know that God sees you in that. This weekend has been so fun of good stuff, and each person who stood up here has shared their own perspective and their own journey with what it means to be called by God, of stepping into Jesus' story in our lives. And so I want to bring us back to the beginning and work our way through Easter Camp. We had Blue open camp up for us and talk to us a bit about a guy named Peter. Someone who was considered not good enough and not smart enough to follow a rabbi, someone who was looked down upon, and yet Jesus saw him and said, "Follow me." Blue also mentioned a conversation that he had with his son, who said, "How will I be able to hear the voice of God when I get into heaven?" And we had Hannah talking to us about how for a long time she was living in darkness, and yet God called her out of that and gave her a new purpose. She talked about this feeling of a new season coming, and she spoke of a shift that's arriving, of a time where God is going to show up. She talked about calling us out into the spaces that maybe might scare us, and letting God breathe into our life, lead us to the river, trading in the old for the new. And it was followed by a powerful time of haka. It was a beautiful response time. We had Adam talk about the brokenness of Easter Saturday, the in-between, the darkness, the loss. How do we cope when things around us are falling apart? All the disciples, they're lost. They are stuck. They're in pain. Their whole world has collapsed, and they think that they're next. They think they're going to be next, and there is no hope. Sometimes we feel a bit like that, eh? And we feel a bit like there is no hope, where the world might look at us and want nothing to do with us, and yet God wants to meet us right then and there in the center of it all. You know, we had the awesome Jordan, Levi, and Emma talk to us about Sunday morning, the resurrection, the encounter, and the news that Jesus has risen. They shared how you have been called by name, you have been called into a relationship with Jesus, and you have been called to go. And finally, we go back to Adam last night as he talks about key moments in life. How Jesus has risen, the one who is calling your name, and you can then live into where Jesus is calling you to. Jesus wants to use you to your full extent. The invitation went out last night to give yourselves wholeheartedly over to following Jesus. You know, we've had all of that from all these people, and we've had a wonderful time, and we really appreciate what they've been sharing. But it's time to go home. Camp is over. Things are finished. Our time of worshiping and being together in this context, and the love and the fun that we've experienced in this space is wrapping up for another year. It is time to go home. And so we find ourselves faced with a question. So what? Why does everything that we have learned today matter? What does it mean? Why should I care? What am I going to do now that camp is over and I have to go home to my normal life, and we are faced with this choice? We can step into the bus or the car to head on home, and we can let everything that we've experienced, seen, or observed just become a camp experience. To let it become just another good memory that we think back on when the times are hard, that it gets washed out and the other things of life. Or you can decide to grab tightly of the things that God has been doing in your life this weekend. And the choice is actually yours. I want to share with you the story of a man who was faced with a very similar situation. In fact, we've heard about him a few times over this weekend already. Blue shared about that fisherman who made the call out who Jesus made the call out to follow him. And the brother Jordan shared about him yesterday morning. The man named Simon Peter. Now, his birth name was Simon, but Peter was the name given to him by Jesus. And so just know that when I say Simon or Peter, I'm talking about the same guy. He was one of Jesus' closest friends. Jesus had his 12 disciples, his 12 followers. But even amongst his 12, he had the three that were sharing the most vulnerable, holy times in Jesus' ministry. And these were his closest apprentices. They were James, John, and this man, Peter. And Peter came face to face with the reality of Jesus' punishments, and he chose to deny Jesus. He was a man who had it best. He lived with Jesus. He journeyed with him. He saw him face to face for 3 years, nothing but contact with Jesus. And yet he doubted. He ran away. He denied Jesus. When asked at the trial of Jesus if he was, one of the people that was hanging around him, he said no. 3 times he said no. Even after Jesus said, "You're going to do this, Peter." And Peter's like, "No, Lord, I would never betray you." 3 times he did it. He was the one who should have grabbed faith by the horns the most and run with it. But he ran away from it. He ran from Jesus and abandoned him. I think sometimes we come to places like Easter camp, and we experience the highs of love and community and fun, and we can dive into the awesomeness that comes with following Jesus. But maybe like Peter, when we get home, reality comes back. We go home and things aren't as loving as they've been here. Maybe we go back to school next term and things are still hard. We're picked last for our teams or not at all, or we're picked on, or mum and dad are still fighting. And life might overwhelm us, and camp can just become one of those things that we choose to think about, but we forget the invitation that's been given to us. Now, I share this not to judge or to assume any of your situations, but I want to tell you that is okay. Jesus' closest friend did that to him. But do you want to hear something beautiful? That even after all he did, this is not the end of Peter's story. We've heard how he ran to the tomb after hearing the news that Jesus' body is gone, but we have a little bit more. So he was devastated. He had just denied Jesus, denied God, and he ran away in shame. And then some people say that he's alive, and people are saying that that's impossible. He's clearly dead. And then all of a sudden, Jesus appears right in the middle of all of his followers, alive. Now, I don't have time to get into the nitty-gritty of that, but ask your leaders another time. Read John chapter 20. But back to Peter. Even though Peter is with them, he still carries that shame. He sees Jesus while with the other followers. And yet inside he's carrying the weight of his decisions, his denial, and his running away. And eventually he just needs to take some time. So he does what he's always done. He was a fisherman by trade. And so he says to some of his mates that are around him, hey, I'm going to go for a fish. And James, John, the disciples, Nathaniel, and Thomas, as well as 2 unnamed followers of Jesus, they all jump into a boat and they head out into the night to go for a fish. See, Peter was already feeling bad, but to make matters worse, he spent a whole night out there and didn't even catch one fish. How bad could things be getting for him? And suddenly Jesus walks out onto the beach. But he's far enough away that they don't recognize him. But Jesus calls out anyway and says, what does he say? He says, throw your net onto the right side of the boat. And they do. And an enormous amount of fish fill the net, so much so that they couldn't pull it into the boat. And right then and there, John shouts, it is the Lord. And Peter, so desperate to reach Jesus, throws his coat on and dives right into the ocean and swims for the shore. When he finally reaches the shore, Jesus is sitting by a fire, cooking them all breakfast. And as they eat, I can only imagine that what Peter is feeling. You know, he's got a mix of joy to be close to Jesus, a mix of pain at what he's done. And maybe he would think back to the time that Blue shared about on Thursday night, the time when Jesus saw him and called him out and said, come and follow me. And yet, back when things were good, and yet he denied him. The life they lived together, the 3 years of apprenticeship, all came back to him with the memory of choosing to turn his back on Jesus and run. All of these feelings would have been churning him up inside, would have been eating him alive. So what does he say? What can he say? What can he even do to make up for what he has done? And the voice of Jesus cuts through all doubt and shame, and he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Well, then feed my lambs. Again, Jesus says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And again, he replies, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Take care of my sheep. And then a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now, Peter was hurt. How many times does he have to say it? So he cries out, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Feed my sheep. And then Jesus says, follow me. He was invited into something more. He was invited to become a part of something greater than himself. He was forgiven. He was seen by Jesus and he was loved and he was called into something new. He was called into the most important task he could ever be given, and that is to follow Jesus. You know, the first time that Jesus called him in, he thought he knew what it meant to follow. He did it for 3 years, but Jesus calls him again and suddenly everything has changed. Everything about who Peter is has changed. All the circumstances have changed, and his call to follow Jesus was much deeper than when it was when Jesus approached him 3 years earlier. He knew what it meant now to follow Jesus. I don't know what you guys came to camp with, what circumstances make up your life, your home, your school, the things that go on inside of your head, the darkness that you feel inside. But I do know one thing that unifies each and every single person in this room. We're invited to the same thing that Peter was. If we want to grab a hold of what we've learned at camp, to not forget the experiences we've had, to live into what might be a new life and a new experience, and live into what we've seen a glimpse of at camp, to live into the call to be children of God. If we want to see the people who hear and grab this weekend and the transformation of God that we've experienced or witnessed, and we want to continue doing so after we go back to the normality, the struggle, the regularity and boredom of life outside of camp, the best thing that we can do is jump on board with the invitation of Jesus, and that is to follow him. Yeah, follow him. That is the single best way to hold on to what we have experienced at camp, to live into Jesus, to follow him. And you might be wondering, that is way easier said than done. I mean, Peter got to live with Jesus by his side for 3 years. He got to see miracles and hear him talk every day. He had it easy, right? What if I want to follow Jesus, but I just can't seem to hear the voice of God calling out to me? I know exactly how that feels, to struggle to hear the voice of God. You know, you're right, not all of us have the privilege of having Jesus standing physically right in front of us. But we do have the privilege of being able to be with him, to seek him out, and to listen out for him. Can I share just a little bit of a secret with you? Do you remember on Thursday night when Blue was sharing about his conversation with his son and how his son had the question, Dad, when I die and go to heaven, there will be so many people there. How will I know God's voice? And can you guys remember what Blue's answer was to his son? He asked his son, well, how do you recognize my voice when there's so many people over at my house? And the answer was, well, that's easy. You're my dad. I know the sound of your voice. Now, it may or may not come as a shock to you, but my secret is that Blue was having that conversation with me. Blue is my dad, and I am the little boy in that story. I was the one who wanted to know how I could recognize the voice of God all those years ago. And you want to know something? I am still on that journey of learning. As I said before, I spent most of my teenage years wondering why I can't hear God's voice and wrestling with what's going on inside me. No matter how much I tried, I just couldn't seem to get it. But you know what? His advice way back then to kid me, the advice that he shared with all of us on Thursday night, he was right. Because as I've grown closer and closer to God, as I've given my life to him and dived deeper into what it is that he's calling me into, I can now, if I listen really closely, if I lean in, if I try to hear it, I can hear the whisper of God in my life. See, something I had a lot of doubt in growing up, but now firmly believe is that God is seeking each and every one of us out. God wants us to hear him, and his voice is able to be heard by each and every single one of us here. For some of you, it might be loud, and maybe you've even heard it this weekend. For others, it's a fluttering in your soul. And for others, it is the still, small voice of God whispering to us. And it might change, and it might look different as we grow and over time, and it's different for everyone. But what is the case for everyone is that God is calling out to you. He wants to be known by you. And how do we hear that voice? How do we know what it is that God is saying to us? Well, hopefully, I've spelled it out enough for you guys over this morning. It's to accept the same invitation as Peter, the same invitation that Jesus has given so many people over the last 2,000 years, the very same invitation that has been given to you this weekend. And it's the invitation to follow him. But it takes a choice to lean into the whispers. It's not like we can just say, oh, yeah, no, maybe I'll give it a go. Maybe I'll see and try giving this Jesus guy a try. I'll see what happens now. That's not how it works. It takes a choice to lean in, to dig in and follow God, to commit to Jesus, to make a decision, to draw a line in the sand and say, this is who I am now. I am a new person in Christ. I am someone who is called by God, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life giving myself to God and listening out for the whispers of him, because I know that God is here. He is here for me. He is calling me out to live. This is for you guys. He is calling you guys to live. If that's you this weekend, if this weekend you've been hearing the loud shouts or the subtle whispers of God, or even if you haven't yet, but you're just hearing about this guy named Jesus, and you know that your life cannot stay the way that it was, and you know that the only true freedom, the true peace, and the true love you will ever get is through him, and you're about to go home, and camp's about to be over, and you know you need to make a decision, what are you gonna do? Look at your crew. Turn to the people around you and look at each other. Look at the group that you came here with this weekend. Look at the friends who dragged you here, the ones who you dragged here. Look at the friendships that you've made over this weekend. Look at the friendships that you've deepened, and ask yourself, who are going to be the people around me that I lean in with? You know, making the choice to lean into God, well, it takes just that. It takes a choice to step into something. So turn to others. Take a look around. Those leaders of yours, ask them to journey with you, to commit to teaching you about Jesus. And your mates, look at them and say, yo, that's us. I'm going to keep you accountable. We're going to do this. ask them to step into this. We're going to commit to showing up to youth group. We're going to commit to going to church, to showing up for each other in our hard spots in life, to choose to make sure you keep on leaning and learning and living out the choices that you have made this weekend to give your life to Jesus. Have each other's backs. Help each other listen out for the whispering of God in each other's lives, because what's better than just one of you on your own listening to the whispers? To have those around you keeping an ear out for what God might be saying too. Do not let Easter camp become just another happy memory for you, because the calling on your life is so much more than that. Make your choice. Draw that line in the sand. Make that decision. Follow Jesus. Lean into him because he has called your name. You only need to listen out for his whispers.